In this video I'll cover the game between Alireza and Magnus Carlsen. This is the 9th round of Norway Chess, and with this victory Magnus won the tournament after 9 rounds and could actually afford to lose the last game with the white pieces against Levon Laronian, as we'll see in the next video. We'll go through the opening in, well, pretty quickly, I think, because this is pretty dry stuff, but as we'll see, Alireza is playing a bit cautious against Magnus in this game. I'm sure he's got tons of respect for Magnus. Bishop g2 here, just starting with the fianchetto opening, Alireza, not his usual e4 shenanigans. And now knight c6 from Magnus, castles, and e5. And this is to stop white from breaking in the center with d4. Of course, Alireza could have done this already here before castling. So Magnus decides, okay, enough is enough. I'll try to stop you from breaking in the center. e4 from Alireza. This looks like a free pawn for black, but if you take it, then rook e1 suddenly. And remember, you are far behind in development with the black pieces here, so you should take care. So Magnus decided that we could play d6 instead, and focusing on development for now. Of course, he could also go in a different direction here with black and play something like g6 and fianchetto his own bishop, but decides d6 is the way to go. c3 now from Alireza. He wants to break in the center. He needed to prepare this with the c3 move because Magnus has a grip on the center. And now g6, d4, cd, cd, and now instead of the autopilot move, ed4, which would leave black in, well, a somewhat passive position. Remember that the d6 pawn is a bit weak, or potentially a bit weak. It's isolated, and the white is enjoying a nice development. So instead of taking twice on d4, Magnus decides that the pin with bishop g4 is a real nuance in the position, and pretty annoying for white as well, because this pin actually reduces white's grip on the center and improves black's grip on the center. So if black were able to move again, then knight d4 would be a star move now. So de from Alireza, could play d5 as well, but now knight d4 would be, well, at least a bit annoying. And Magnus would follow up with bishop takes f3, and the knight would be fantastically placed on d4. This is the black strategy in this variation. This is the strategy employed by Magnus in this game. He wants to control the dark squares in the center, especially the d4 square. So de5, d takes e5 as well, knight c3, bishop g7, finishing development. And now after h3, Magnus decides to pick off the knight on f3. Not really concerned about the bishop pair here, as black strategy involves controlling the d4 square. It revolves around this square, and not the bishop pair, as we usually are concerned with. So bishop takes f3 is a fine move. Alireza decides to exchange queens before recapturing. Bishop f3 castles, and now king g2, just improving the position of the king ever so slightly. And now knight d4. So we see black is doing fine from the opening. The knight is doing very well on d4. We have to note that, okay, even though black has a nice square on d4, white has the same potential on d5. So white is by no means in trouble here, but black is doing pretty okay. Black is solid. But it's not like Magnus would have been confident of winning this game at this point. It's just pretty solid, especially after white's next move, bishop g5. Just copying black's strategy from earlier. He wants to take on f6, because this bishop on g5 doesn't really contribute to the control of the d5 square. This knight on f6 does. So white decides that exchanging these two pieces to control the d5 square is nice, because then the knight can jump to d5 without being a exchanged. So that's Alireza's strategy here. Takes, and knight d5. This is just what Magnus did. So if king g7, we would have a completely symmetrical position, at least except for the rook on d8. So this would be completely symmetrical. Instead, Magnus decides he wants to play rook d6 to bring the bishop back around to the queenside. Now, a move like knight f6 check, for example, would be, I guess, pretty tempting. You know, exchange another piece and maybe I'll get a draw, you know, against a higher rated player or something like that. So rook takes back, and now we see the triumph of the knight on d4. This is exactly what Black wants in this kind of positions, because now the bishop on f3 is so passive. It doesn't really have any active possibilities, while the knight on d4 is super active and nicely placed, and there's no way to chase it away with any pawns or pieces. So this is a sort of dream position for Black positionally. That's not something you would do with white here. Instead, Alireza decides rook ac1 is the way to go, bishop d8, and some more consolidating moves from both players. Knight e3 it is fine. Maybe knight c4, maybe even knight c2 is possible. Rook a6, and now h5, just trying to limit the scope of the bishop on f3. So I'm not allowing something like bishop g4 at some point, or even knight g4. Just trying to place the pawns on the king side on the opposite color of your own bishop. So that would be though the bishop would have active possibilities on the king side. So knight c4, bishop f6, covering the pawn. h4, Alireza replicates Magnus's strategy. Rook c8, and now some exchanges. Could, of course, you could consider c6 here, because your knight is so well placed, and you get some potential in the b file. At least you could try to play in the b file. Well, rook c6 is of course the logical move. The idea behind the move like bc6 is to control the d5 square. So you would have a perfectly placed knight on d4. White would not be able to get the same kind of placement for his own knight. That's the logic here, but of course this pawn is a bit weak as well. So that's a trade-off you would have to consider during the game. Magnus did, I'm sure. Rook c6 was his choice. Rook d3. Now some more maneuvering from the players. As we can see, this is a game where Magnus just patiently waits and does not want to trade too many pieces here, because Magnus still has some hope of pressing Alireza. As we can see, Alireza down to 14 minutes against Magnus's an hour and 11 minutes. Means that it's quite possible that Alireza was pretty nervous during this game. Lots of respect, of course, for the world champion. And his play so far indicates that a draw would suit him perfectly in this game. Magnus, however, has greater ambitions, and after bishop b6, rook c3 was the move from Alireza, which got him into some real trouble, because now after rook c3, bc3, we can see that okay, if the knight has to retreat somewhere, then white should be pretty solid. You could play c4 and break up the position, or knight d5, and you would be pretty confident that a draw is within range for white. But after knight b3, it's not so easy, because now bishop e3 is a threat, and also knight d2 is a threat, and you can't take this because the pawn would be way too dangerous in combination with the bishop, of course, going to c5 a3 to pick up the pawn. So this would be losing. King e1 was the move played by Alireza, but doesn't really help. Bishop c5. And as we can see, Magnus has calculated. He probably saw this some moves ago, but knight takes f2, and black bags a full pawn. However, Alireza has some counterplay on the queen side. Bishop c6, f6, knight e3, and a knight going into the corner for Magnus. This does require some intense calculation, because you could end up trapping your own knight in the corner after knight f1. But Magnus has everything under control, of course. Alireza manages to trade off the pawns on the queen side, and this endgame should be a draw with perfect play. However, Alireza pressed on time. 3.5 minutes against Magnus's 50 minutes indicates that this will be a long squeeze from Magnus, or at least he will attempt to make this into a long squeeze. King f3, bishop d4, of course, to be able to escape with the knight. g4, nicely done by Alireza, exchanging another pawn. But now, as we can see, Magnus's pieces are perfectly coordinated. The pawn structure is slightly better, and he's a pawn to the good. So of course Magnus is still trying to trick Alireza into making some decisive mistake. Bishop e8. Now the waiting game from Alireza, knight f7, knight c5. He does not want to make this trade because the pass pawn would be too good for black, and it would be a dream scenario for black to have this kind of position with the knight going to e5, perhaps supporting the pass pawn, and the bishop feeling pretty offside on f7. So instead, knight g3. Bishop c3, and now h5 from Alireza, trying to yet again exchange some more pawns and pieces. A very nice exchanging maneuver from Magnus now. Bishop e1. So okay, Alireza manages to win back the pawn, but in this endgame, it's definitely black that's pressing, at least on time, but also slightly on the board, because the knight is more flexible than the bishop. It has to be said that of course this endgame is a draw with perfect play, and as we can see, Alireza has to draw within range the entire endgame before slipping up at the end. So Magnus, due to the knight's flexibility, manages to win the pawn on h5, but even so, this endgame should be a draw, thanks to this blocking mechanism from the white king, just keeping black's king out from the position. So now some maneuvering from the players. This is of course to be able to meet king g6 with king g4, and the same blocking maneuver as we've seen. King f8, king f2, yet again the same kind of positioning from the white king. King e2, king e8. Magnus of course trying to pressure Alireza both on time but also on the board, trying to trick him a bit. King d7, king d3, king d6, and now king c3. It's a major slip up from Alireza. King c5, and the black king will enter the position and will win the pawn on e4. Something like this, for example, will end in defeat for white. So king c3 was the decisive mistake. Could have kept things even Steven with king d2, because after king c5, then king c3 keeps the balance. But that's not so easy with so little time on the clock. Alireza was down to 5 seconds or something when he made the decisive mistake, and that's brutal, of course, but that's chess, and that's also a bit typical of Magnus Carlsen, squeezing his opponents in long end games. Well done by Magnus. This win secured him the tournament victory with a round to spare, but also a very human error from Alireza, as we've just seen.